What's up, y'all? It's Project Photography back with another video, and today we got an incredible video talking about these two lenses, the Nikon 17-28 f2.8 as well as the Nikon 14-30 f4, and what lens would be better for you in your landscape photography. I personally have used these lenses quite a bit. This one has been a bit more recent for me, but I've used this lens, the 14-30, for the past 3 years, and I absolutely love this lens. But I know people have different needs for their landscape photography, and I'm here to break that down for you in this video. So in this video, we're gonna be talking about things like aperture, ergonomics, focal length, optical performance, and then go into our conclusion, give you my final thoughts about these lenses. So let's jump right in and talk about aperture. And one of the biggest features that separate these two lenses is definitely the aperture. We have an f4 with the 14-30 and then a f2.8 with the 17-28. Now, for landscape photographers, this might not actually be that big of a difference, because for landscape photography, we're shooting pretty much everything at f8 because we want to have the sharpest images possible. f8 makes sure that we're sharp at the corners, we're sharp in the middle, and make sure that everything is just corner to corner. But you would use a f2.8 over an f4 for something like astrophotography, where you want to let in as much light as possible and reduce the shutter time that you have to use and get as clean of image as possible. Which honestly is kind of weird, because I've been able to use the 14-30 for astrophotography, but there are definitely some limitations that an f2.8 would definitely not have. So if we're talking about, what would actually make a big difference when shooting with an f2.8 versus an f4, the only one for landscape photography would really be astrophotography. So if astrophotography is something that's incredibly important to you, then having the 17-28 might just make a little bit more sense over the 14-30. But we have to talk about more than just the aperture. Let's talk about ergonomics, because ergonomics for me, how you handle lens, how you feel it and use it, is definitely incredibly important. And something that I really want to know and talk about is the weight. Now, the 14-30 has a 485 gram weight to it, while the 17-28 is a 450 gram. Now, this honestly is not that big of a difference, but when you hold it, you can definitely feel that this lens, the 14-30, is a little bit heavier and a bit more denser. Also because it's just more compact than the 17-28. It's gonna make a huge difference when you're carrying it around in your bag. Not really, but this next part is, and we're talking about compactness, and the 14-30 definitely is more compact than the 17-28 because it has this locking mechanism. So when you're traveling with it, it is much smaller, and when you're shooting landscape photography, this is incredibly important because you want to maximize the space in your bag and make sure that you can carry as much as possible. And the 14-30 just allows that a little bit more over the 17-28. But if we're being 100% honest, I feel like the 17-28 is plenty compact. It's just that the 14-30 is just that much more compact. Now, something else I really want to talk about is the AF/MS switch. The 14-30 has one, the 17-28 doesn't. Now, this will be important for you guys that shoot video along with photos, where you can go ahead and use the 14-30 with autofocus, and then when you want to shoot your landscape images, go ahead and switch that to manual focus without having to go into any of the settings, and just go ahead and shoot your photos accordingly. 17-28 does not have that, so that's something you might have to work around, going into the settings and so forth. But honestly, I think that's kind of a niche thing for video creators as well as landscape photographers, but having the AF/MS switch is definitely nice to have. Let's jump into the internal zoom versus the external zoom, because that is another major feature that separates these two lenses. And the 17-28 has internal zoom, and the 14-30 doesn't. Now, is this important for landscape photography? I think it is a little bit, because when you're shooting there out in the elements and you're zooming with your lens and you have a filter on the 17-28, you actually protect the insides of the lens a lot more versus the 14-30. So that means less dust and other elements getting into the lens. And now this might be important for you guys, and honestly it is for me. I shoot a lot of beach landscapes and I'm out there in the water, and it's just nice to know that my filters are going to protect the lens itself. But here's the thing, these lenses are both weather sealed really nicely, so it might not even be an issue at the end of the day. But it is really nice having that internal zoom. So the last thing I think we really need to talk about is how well built these lenses are. First of all, the 14-30 is incredibly well built. This has a metal chassis, and for the most part, it feels really premium. Whereas the 17-28 definitely feels a little bit more plasticky, and the chassis scratches a lot easier. So for me, when I'm using my lenses, I definitely beat the crap out of them. I mean, you can even see a little dent here in my 14-30. And it's really nice to know that The lenses I'm using are not going to break on me anytime soon, and they're going to be durable in the long run, which is why I think the 14-30 definitely wins in this category. So let's jump right in and talk about focal length, because that is another important difference between these two lenses. And straight up, the 14-30 just beats the 17-28 outright. Not only is it wider, but it's also longer. But to be honest, the longer end probably doesn't matter as much as the wider end. And if you've ever shot with a 14mm lens, you know just how wide that lens can get. This means that we're exaggerating those foreground elements even more. We're capturing more in the image, and we just get a different feel and unique look to the lens that other wide angles simply can't do. And the thing about the 17-28 is that 17 is plenty wide for most people. But for me personally, I feel like I wasn't able to get absolutely everything that I wanted in the frame, and we're not able to exaggerate those foreground elements nearly as much. But here's the thing, if you've never shot with a 14mm, you'll probably not notice the difference between 17 versus 14. A wide angle is a wide angle for the most part. So if you haven't shot with a 14mm, I honestly think 17-28 will be just fine. But for me personally, that 14-30 is absolutely incredible and a great focal range. And the last thing I really want to talk about is optical performance. Now, if we're being straight up, the 14-30 has some of the best optical performance out of honestly any Nikon Z lens. And this is an incredible lens. I mean, it is an S-line moniker lens versus the 17-28 isn't. And honestly, I can tell the difference and I can feel the difference. The 14-30 images just feel a lot more contrasty, feel more punchy. The colors pop a lot more. It's not as flat, and the image is just much sharper corner to corner versus something like the 17-28. And I'm not saying the 17-28 is bad, because it really isn't. It has pretty good optical performance. It's just not as nice in those different categories, and you can definitely feel it in the lens. When you get images off the 17-28, you don't really get wowed versus the 14-30, where you take an image and you're just like, wow, this is really stunning or really nice. Because with the 14-30, you're getting 14-24 level image quality without paying that premium price point, because these lenses are actually both at the pretty much the exact same price point. And when you're comparing, what you can do with a lens and these type of images you get, you see the price point, and you see that because they're both at the same price point, you really have to give the edge to the 14-30, because it's just that much better of a lens in terms of optical performance. And a great lens isn't a great lens until you can shoot amazing images with it. So let's jump right into the conclusion. I'm gonna give you my final thoughts about these lenses. So first of all, these lenses are both great. I don't think you'll have a problem going with either one for your landscape photography. But I think personally, for the everyday photographer that, actual photography is important to them, and you want to do landscape photography, but that isn't necessarily your main thing, I think the 17-28 actually makes more sense, because you can simply do more with this lens. I think the 14-30 is a relatively niche lens, right? Because we have that f4, we want to capture a lot in the image, but an f2.8 is just going to be better than an f4. So if you're a general photographer that's going to go ahead and do some landscape photography on the side, and if astrophotography is important to you, then the 17-28 definitely makes more sense over the 14-30. But if you want the best image quality possible, and you want the wideness of that 14-30, and you want the compactness as well as the better build quality and the better features, the 14-30 is so hard to go wrong with. It's an incredible lens with incredible ergonomics, and it's just built like a tank. I've had this for about 3 years, and I absolutely love this lens. It's the best wide-angle lens I've ever used. So if you're truly dedicated to landscape photography, this might be the lens for you, the 14-30 f4s. But I have both of them because I have use cases for both of them, for video, for client work, for landscape photography especially, and astrophotography is definitely in there. So yeah, guys, that is pretty much my rundown on these two lenses and what I think would be better for landscape photography. Let me know what you think about this video and what lens you would rather have for your photography. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for experiencing the world with me today. Please feel free to rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.